A very pleasant and blissful morning, everyone. A new day has come for us to learn new things and acquire new knowledge. Join us as we dive into new topics that will surely give us something fresh to digest. Within this discussion, we will be tackling two modules. But before that, let us meet the people that worked on this reporting. We have yours truly, Apollo Greg D. Costa. We have Miss Marienel Monton, Miss Angel Cabael, Miss Gretchen Cruz, Miss Trisha Dumencel, Miss Hannah Sapin, Miss Sheryn Palloc, Miss Katrina Padilla, and lastly, Mr. Nicholas Alangilan. Let's jump straight with our first module entitled Voters Awareness. We will begin with the topic of the right of suffrage. But before actually jumping into this whole definition, let us first define these words one by one. Next slide po. Ayan. What is a right? So a right, as defined by the Oxford Languages, is a moral or legal entitlement to have or to obtain something or to act in a certain way. So in a simpler manner, rights or karapatan in Filipino enable us to do things because we are entitled to do so or to have possession of something. Pero these rights come with the responsibility and obligation to ensure na yung mga ginagawa natin or yung mga tinatanggap nating opportunities are morally right and ethically correct. For example, right nating mag-possess ng something pero hindi morally right na mag-possess tayo ng firearms like guns in public places. Next slide po. Next, we have the word suffrage. So suffrage, it is simply the right to vote or participate in political elections. Kagaya ng word na right, ito ay may kasama rin or kaakibat na obligations na kailangan nating itackle mamaya. Some articles state that there are two types of suffrage, namely the active and the passive suffrage. Active suffrage is the right to vote, while passive suffrage is the right to stand for election. I will no longer explain this because self-explanatory naman na po sila. Now that we know kung anong ibig sabihin ng mga words na to, i-discuss naman natin yung concept ng right of suffrage as per legal documents na sinusundan ng ating bansa. Next slide po. Ayan, unahin natin ang right of suffrage. So basically, the human right of suffrage is embodied in three main instruments. Meron tayong una, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Pangalawa ay itong International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And last but definitely not the least is our very own 1987 Philippine Constitutions. So all these documents may be written in different eras and styles, pero something common sa kanilang lahat ay they all mandate the country regarding the universality of the right, equality in access to public service, and the secrecy of votes na i-explain ko po mamaya kapag nag-jump na tayo sa iba pa nating discussion. So, let us first discuss kung paano ba dinescribe ang right of suffrage sa Universal Declaration of Human Rights noong 1948. Next slide po tayo. Ayan. So, konting history lang. Ay, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or the UDHR, isa po itong document na parang roadmap for freedom and equality na nagpo-protect ng rights ng bawat individual saan man sa mundo. So ito ay na-adopt ng United Nations noong December 10, 1948 and kinocompose po ito ng 30 articles. Actually, itong 30 articles na ito ay hindi lang all about the right of suffrage. Meron lang isa na nagtatackle sa right to vote ng mga tao, which is itong naka-flash sa screen na Article 21 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is composed of three statements. First, everyone has the right to take part in the government of his country or through freely chosen representatives. So anong ibig sabihin nito? This just simply says na lahat tayo ay may karapatan na makibilang or makialam sa gobyerno ng bansa dahil tayo ang mga citizens nito. It's either we personally engage or through chosen representatives. Sinong representatives ba yung tinutukoy dito? Ito ay mga government officials na tayo rin mismo ang nag-elect or naghalal. Halimbawa, sa mga congressmen and congresswomen, pagdating sa House of Representatives, sila yung magre-represent ng ating lugar and hindi tayo pwedeng tumayo para sa lugar natin or para sa sarili natin. They will be the ones to stand on our behalf and raise our concerns and deliver our suggestions. Second, we have the statement that says that everyone has the right of equal access to public service in his country. Basically, lahat tayo ay may karapatang makatanggap ng pantay na serbisyo mula sa gobyerno, mula sa national government man yan, pababa sa ating mga barangay. Hindi pwedeng kung sino lang ang kanilang kakilala ay sila lamang ang makakatanggap ng mga serbisyong ito. And lastly, it is stated that the will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of the government. This will shall be expressed in periodic and genuine elections, which shall be universal and equal suffrage, and shall be held by secret vote or by equivalent free voting procedures. Sinasabi rito na we, the people, tayo dapat ang maging basis ng gobyerno. In what form? Through elections. I still clearly remember an impactful phrase na sinabi ni Catrina last 2022 during a campaign. Sinabi niya na, the government has the power to change our lives, but we have the power to change the government. Ine-emphasize ng statement na ito na we, the people, have the control of who we elect and will therefore directly affect our own lives. Sinasabi rin dito na universal and equal suffrage dapat ang mangyari, which means na ang right to vote ay dapat maging available and be exercised by everyone equally. And sa last part nitong statement number 3, it is stated that the secrecy and free will of voting shall be ensured. This just means na ang boto natin ay kailangang i-treat with confidentiality. This ends our discussion for UDHR. Let's jump straight to our next document called the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Next slide po tayo. Ayan. Kagaya ng unang document, let's take a short historical trip kung paano ba na-adopt itong ICCPR. So, taken from a credible source, this covenant was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly noong 16th of December 1996 and na-enter naman siya into force noong 23rd of March ng 1976. Noong May 2012, ay na-ratify itong covenant na ito by 167 states kung saan isa ang Pilipinas sa mga estadong ito. The covenant elaborates further the civil and political rights of freedoms listed in the UDHR. So sinasabi rito na parang ini-strengthen niya lang or binibigyan ng more emphasis ang mga karapatan na nabanggit sa UDHR kanina. Etong covenant na ito naman ay may 53 articles in total. So next slide po tayo. Let's proceed with the Article 25 nitong ICCPR. It is stated that every citizen shall have the right and opportunity, without any of the distinctions mentioned in Article 2 of the same document, and without unreasonable restrictions, the following rights and opportunities. So, bago natin basahin itong A, B, and C, ano ba itong sinasabing distinction sa Article number 2 ng parehong document? Sa Article 2 nitong ICCPR, sinasabi na lahat ng bansa na mag-a-adapt ng covenant na ito ay dapat bigyan ng pantay na karapatan ang kanilang mga mamamayan. And hindi dapat maging dahilan yung kanilang race, color, sex, language, religion, mga political opinions, national or social origin, property, birth and other status para hindi sila mabigyan ng karapatang bumoto. So in short, walang dapat maging obstacle or parang walang maghihinder sa mga tao para makaboto sila. So let's read these rights and opportunities. First, A, to take part in the conduct of public affairs directly or through freely chosen representatives. So sinasabi rito na dapat mabigyan ng karapatan o kalayaan ang isang individual na makipag-participate sa mga public affairs. Ito ay maaaring directly or siya mismo ang nakikiisa or through freely chosen representatives. Again, ito ay yung ating mga inelect as government officials. B, to vote and to be elected at genuine periodic elections, which shall be by universal and equal suffrage and shall be held by secret ballot, guaranteeing the free expression of the will of the electors. Ayan, sinasabi rito na we have the right to vote and to be elected. Sinasabi rin dito na magkakaroon ng genuine and periodic elections. Genuine sapagkat ang election ay isang critical event sa isang bansa na kailangan gawin ng tama at makatotohanan, and periodic naman dahil kailangan consistent ang years ng interval between one election period to another. Dinagdag pa rito na there should be a universal and equal suffrage kagaya sa UDHR, meaning lahat ay mabibigyan ng karapatang bumoto. And lastly, kailangan secret ang ballot para mag-guarantee ang free will ng mga electors. Kagaya rin kanina, kailangan may confidentiality. And lastly, to have access on general terms of equality to public service in his country. Kagaya lang din ng kanina sa UDHR, no one should be exempted of the service from the government. And sorry po sa mga background noise ha. And for our last document, ayan, next slide po tayo. So ayan, let's proceed with the 1987 Philippine Constitution. Basically, alam naman natin na ang 1987 Philippine Constitution, nagsiserve siya as law book ng country which states all the mandating rules and regulations, keeping our country generally at peace and in order. So historically, na-approve siya noong 1986 ng Constitutional Commission noong 1986 kay President Aquino, tapos noong 15 of October nung same year, then na-ratify naman siya noong February 2, 1987 ng isang plebiscite, and na-proclaim siya noong 11th of February 1987. Ang 1987 Philippine Constitution ay composed ng 18 articles. And next slide po tayo. Ayan, Article 5 ng 1987 Philippine Constitution. This article is entitled Suffrage. Article 5, Section 1 states that suffrage may be exercised by all citizens of the Philippines, not otherwise disqualified by law, who are at least 18 years of age and who shall have resided in the Philippines for at least 1 year and in the place wherein they propose to vote for at least 6 months immediately preceding the election. No literacy, property, or other substantive requirement shall be imposed on the exercise of suffrage. So sabi sa Section 1, lahat ng mamamayan ng bansa ay pwedeng bumoto except sa mga na-disqualify ng ating batas, which will be explained by other reporters. Dapat ay 18 years old pataas, dapat tumira na sa Pilipinas for at least a year, and kailangan 6 months na nananatili doon sa lugar kung saan siya boboto. Wala nang ibang requirements na kailangan, hindi kailangan literate ka or hindi kailangan meron kang ownership ng mga property. Article 5, Section 2, the Congress shall provide a system for securing the secrecy and sanctity of the ballot, as well as a system for absentee voting by qualified Filipino abroad. So kagaya sa mga naunang documents, kailangan mapanatili ang secrecy and sanctity ng ballot. And yung mga Filipinos naman na nasa abroad, na dito pa rin rehistrado sa ating bansa, ay kinakailangang mabigyan ng separate system sa pagboto. And ito ay nakapaloob sa Republic Act 10590, also known as the Overseas Voting Act of 2013. So ito namang last part ng Article 5, yung nasa baba. The Congress shall also design a procedure for the disabled and the illiterates to vote without the assistance of other persons. Until then, they shall be allowed to vote under existing laws and such rules as the Commission on Elections may promulgate to protect the secrecy of the ballot. So ayan, ito naman ay para basically sa mga disabled and illiterates. That's it for our topic on the right of suffrage. I am now passing the floor to Ms. Marienel for her discussion po.
Thank you, Mr. Apollo. Now, I will be discussing the topic about history of elections. History. During the Spanish and American colonial period, there were attempts to elect certain local officials and following some wars that had happened in the land of the Philippines. After that, multiple elections were held peacefully in provincial and local areas of the country. However, the procedure was only available to mere voters and was more of a ceremonial rather than a genuine democratic mechanism. This proves that there was a discrimination happening during that time. They even said that women are only allowed to do their house chores and take care of their children. Act number 4112, granting the right of suffrage to the women and making them eligible to all public offices and for other purposes. This act was approved on December 7, 1993. Dito na nagkaroon ng karapatan ng mga babae na bumoto basta sila ay marunong magbasa at magsulat with either Spanish, English, or a native language. The first democratic election after World War II was the 1946 election. The first post-independence election was held in 1946. 1946 election for President and Vice President of the Republic, members of the Senate and of the House of Representatives. From then on, the country operated on a two-party system where two major political parties, the Nacionalista Party and the Liberal Party, figure in figure in succeeding elections. Pero nung dineclare ni Marcos Sr. ang martial law noong 1972, the 1935 Constitution was scrapped. Then ang interim batasang pambansa was created and the 1973 Constitution was adopted. Election for the interim batasang pambansa was called in 1978. In 1978, elections for the interim batasang pambansa were called. The kilusang bagong lipunan was chosen to lead the government. Although Marcos's goal was to legitimize his unpopular regime and establish a rubber stamp legislature, the election was purportedly to restore the old political system. The Marcos administration engaged in widespread electoral manipulation to achieve victory during the exercise, which violated democratic norms. Local elections in 1980 was characterized by widespread terrorism, violence, and wholesale fraud. The 1980s local elections were marked by widespread terrorism, violence, and wholesale fraud. Intense opposition coming from the peasant and student sector in the countryside supported peasant and labor unrest. In order to recover credibility, Marcos resorted to the election process in 1981. The constitutional requirement of a parliamentary system requires this. After the 1983 assassination of Aquino, there were massive protests that forced the creation of a larger democratic space. Elections for the Batasang Pambansa took place in 1984 to replace the interim Batasang Pambansa. The purpose of the activity was to draw attention away from the assassination of Senator Aquino. The decade was still characterized by Marcos's declining popularity and the public's developing political will ensure that their opinions are represented in election outcomes. In 1986, there were unexpected elections. The pervasive manipulation of elections and the end was begun in the same year as irregularities in the social, political, and economic order began to deteriorate. The People Power Revolution of 1986 saw the widespread uprising that resulted in the ouster of Marcos, the collapse of KBL, and the installation of Corazon Aquino as president. Aquino's program of restoring democracy, promoting stability, and establishing political legitimacy involved three major electoral exercises. The first one is national plebiscite for the approval of 1987 Constitution in February 1987. The 1987 Constitution established a representative democracy with power divided among three separate and independent branches of government, which includes the executive, a bicameral and the judiciary. The second one is election for members of the Senate and House of Representatives in May 1987. In the Philippines, elections for the House of Representatives took place in May 11, 1987. This was the country's first legislative election since 1984, a House of Representative election since 1969, and the presidential election since the People Power Revolution that ousted Ferdinand Marcos and installed Corazon Aquino in office following allegations of election fraud by the former during the 1986 contest with the latter. And the last one is local elections in January 1988. Elections for a new set of provincial and the local city and municipal officials were held in the Philippines on January 18, 1988 under the new Constitution of the Philippines, which was ratified in 1987. 1992 synchronized national and local elections. During the 1992 synchronized national and local elections, the people voted for the first time under the 1987 Constitution for president. The primary political problem was destroying trapo or conventional politics. Local and congressional elections were conducted in 1995. During these two significant elections, a new type of fraud known as dagdag bawas or a deletion of votes from one candidate to transfer them to the competing candidate was in use. In 1980, in 1998, the first party list elections were held. With the support of the people, Joseph Estrada was elected President of the Republic. However, in January 2001, Exodus, a repeat of 1986 People Power, removed Estrada from Malacanang and seated Gloria Macapagal Arroyo as the new president. Our votes are crucial. Time and again, the struggle for our independence and democratic governance resulted in the kind of political system, political leaders, and electorate that we have right now. Elections have been an important feature and mechanism in practice, and it is so that they will continue to serve as a vehicle towards a genuine democratic governance through a more informed electorate. And that's all. Now let us give the floor to Mr. Apollo to discuss the elections and democracy.
Thank you, Ms. Marienel. Our third topic for this module is entitled Elections and Democracy. Just like what we did on our first module or our first topic, i-define muna natin itong mga salitang ito individually. So ano nga ba itong election? It is simply the process of casting votes among candidates in order to elect them for a certain position. In a simpler term, election is the process of voting. On the other hand, next slide po tayo. Let's give meaning to the word democracy. Ayan, democracy, it is the system of government by the whole population or all the eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives, according ito sa Oxford Languages. Ito naman ay isang uri ng pamamahala kung saan nag-e-elect ang mga tao ng kanilang magiging leader sa gobyerno. Ang bansang Pilipinas ay isang halimbawa ng demokratikong bansa. Since it has been said that the Philippines is a democratic country, let us see kung ano nga ba ang elections and democracy sa ating bansa. Next slide po. Ayan. First, the Constitution guarantees that we are a sovereign people where all government authority comes from. Sovereignty or the power to govern is exercised directly through suffrage and indirectly through public officials elected by the people. The will of the people, then, is best expressed in clean, orderly, and honest elections. This means that we, The people have the power to change the government. The sovereignty or the power to govern lies within our hands and we should take care to this power on a positive note. Sinasabi rin dito na we exercise sovereignty directly in the form of suffrage or voting and indirectly through the people that we elected. Ibig sabihin nito, since tayo ang bumoboto, ito na yung mismong form natin ng participation sa government. And we also participate indirectly through the people that we elect. Second statement, the representative democratic structure in which the people govern is based on the idea of consent of the governed. Thus, the government officials chosen and elected by the people become servants and not masters of the people from whom and for whom these officials exercise their power and authority. Sinasabi naman dito na democracy nakabase siya sa idea na consent of the governed, meaning kailangan ng consent ng mga nasasakupan or ng mga citizen. Dahil dito, yung mga government officials ay nagiging servants ng mga tao at hindi masters. Dahil kung hindi sila inelect ng mga tao, hindi sila magkakaroon ng posisyon. Isa pa, ang bawat desisyon nila ay para sa atin at hindi para sa sarili nila o sa kanilang pamilya. This just goes to show that we shouldn't act head over heels to a government official. Let's not be fanatics and loyalists, but rather, let's all be critics. Don't be afraid to voice out what seemed to be an anomaly in the government. Dahil on the first place, tumakbo naman sila to serve the people and not to be praised by them. Next slide po. Ayan. Third statement, the citizen voters are entitled to free and informed choice on whom to vote and must be dictated by the genuine welfare of the majority. If every individual political choice and decision made by the citizen voters will determine the kind of government that will serve them. So this statement says that the voters should have their own will about their choices sa mga candidates. This also means na no one should dictate them kung ano ang dapat nilang gawin or sino ang dapat nilang iboto. They can be open to suggestions but not to the extent that they will be forced to vote a certain candidate. For example, sa loob ng isang bahay, hindi pwedeng pilitin ng mga magulang ang kanilang anak to vote for a certain candidate. Dapat hayaan nilang pumili ng sariling boto ang kanilang mga anak. Let's now proceed to the specific mechanisms on elections and democracy. These are the processes to be followed in connection with elections and democracy. So, since the enactment of the 1987 Constitution, elections for the President and the Vice President are held every 6 years, while elections for senators, members of the House of Representatives, and local government are happening every 3 years. So, self-explanatory siya pero sinasabi lang na 6 years ang pagitan ng elections ng presidency and vice presidency. Tapos sa mga senador, sa mga members of House of Representatives at sa local government naman ay every 3 years. Next po. At the local level, barangay elections and sangguniang kabataan elections are also held periodically. Ayan, so sa ating mga barangay and sa ating sangguniang kabataan, meron din tayong specific guidelines and specific number of years na interval between one election and another. In 1993 and 1996, elections for the Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, also known as the ARMM or the ARM, were held. And in the 1996 ARMM elections, nag-serve siya as a pilot test for automated system of elections. Ayan, very self-explanatory din ito. And lastly, aside from voting in the elections, our Constitution mandates other mechanisms to advance democratization and citizen stake in governance. So bukod sa ating pagboto, meron din ibang program or rules ang ating Constitution, itong 1987 Constitution, regarding sa kung paano makakapag-participate at kung paano iti-take ang side ng mga citizen para sa governance ng ating mga government officials. So this ends my report and I am hoping that I was able to share a new learning to you guys. I am now passing the floor to the next reporter. May I call on Ms. Cabael for her discussion.
So, am I audible? If I am, so let's proceed. So, thank you, Mr. Costa, for that fruitful and informative discussion. So, before we proceed to the first topic that I would discuss, let me first again formally introduce myself. So, I am Angel Mickyla Nicole C. Cabael, and I am here to tackle a topic that is all about, as you can see on the screen, the government structure of our state. But before we dig deeper sa usapin about nga sa government structure, himay-himayin muna natin bawat subtopics na related dito. So, flash in the screen is a topic that is very closely related sa government structure. So, kung nakinig kayo sa discussion reporter right before me, which is Mr. Costa, may idea na siguro kayo kung paano nag-work yung democracy sa bansa natin, specifically when it comes sa elections. So, bale, ang practice niya is lahat ng public officials na nakaupo ngayon sa pwesto is elected using the votes of the eligible voters of the Philippines. Kaya nga, in-emphasize sa Article 2, Section 1 ng 1987 Constitution na government authority emanates from the people of our state. Kasi nga sa mga botante nanggagaling halos lahat ng mga public officials na nakaupo ngayon sa gobyerno. But despite that, sabi ko nga, halos lahat lang ng public officials ang pwede nating i-appoint sa pwesto, meaning may limitations pa rin siya and hindi entirely tayo yung nagluluklok sa ibang officials. Kasi if you would think kung sino-sino yung mga nasa pwesto ngayon sa government, may iba pa rin nakaupo talaga sa posisyon na hindi naman natin officially inelect like yung mga executive secretary, secretary of foreign affairs, and secretary of finance, and marami pang iba. So, hindi naman natin nakita yung mga positions na yan sa balota last time. So, therefore, hindi tayo yung nagluklok sa kanila. But then, hindi ibig sabihin nun na may kung ano nang nangyari behind the scenes. Kasi may reasonable naman na paliwanag dyan at properly stated naman yung specific condition na to sa 1987 Philippine Constitution. So, sa part na to, dito na papasok yung next topic natin for this module, which is yung government structure nga, as I said earlier, or some may call it political structure. So, next slide, please. So, as you can see in the slide presented, may tatlong branch or department ang Philippine government, namely executive, legislative, and judiciary. Sa executive department, kabilang doon yung president, vice president, cabinet members, and even sa local government like the municipal and city councils. So, senators and House of Representatives naman belongs to the Legislative Department. And lastly, Supreme Court, Regional Metropolitan Trial Courts, and Special Courts belong to the Judiciary Department. So, these offices or branches ng government ay itinatag in the effect of the 1987 Constitution bilang checks and balances ng gobyerno mula sa labis na paggamit na kapangyarihan ng Estado. So, actually, yung pinaka-cover ng lesson para sa part na to is only the executive and legislative department ng government lang. So, dito lang tayo mag-focus para sa topic na to. So, for the detailed explanation of the first two branches of government, proceed na tayo sa next slide. So, next slide, please. Ayan, for the first branch of government, we have the executive department. So, sabi nga sa previous slide kanina, kung na-take note nyo siya, executive department is composed of the president and the vice president who are both elected by direct votes of the eligible voters and are ought to serve for 6 years. So, the Constitution grants the president an authority to appoint his cabinet members. So, ito yung pinapoint out ko kanina sa previous slide na not because we're in a democratic country, ibig sabihin na agad nun na lahat talaga ng officials ay elected using direct popular votes. Kasi there are also some position like the cabinet members nga na ina-appoint using the power of the president directly or kung tatawagin is executive power. So, this department, the executive department, form a large portion of the country's bureaucracy, since our state already have 22 executive departments. So, hindi pa kasama dyan yung heads ng minor agencies and offices. And also, add ko lang pala, bago ko makalimutan, na sakop rin pala ng executive power yung appointment ng other high officials like public ministers and consuls. Kaya malaki talaga yung porsyento ng department na to sa totality of our government structure. So, Eddie, ayun na nga. Aware na kayo kung sino-sino yung mga nakapaloob sa executive branch ng government. So now, let's tackle naman yung nasa third bullet, which is kung ano nga ba yung main function ng branch ng government na to and kung bakit ba siya mahalaga. So, yung pinaka-main purpose ng branch ng government na to is that they are the ones na nag-i-implement at nag-i-enforce ng laws na sinulat ng Congress. So, the cabinet and independent agencies have separate missions and responsibilities kahit pa nakapaloob sila sa isang branch of government. But still, at the very end of the day, ang main goal lang nila is to properly enforce and administer the federal laws. So, federal laws will further be tackled sa next branch of government natin. So, next slide, please. So, ayan. The second branch naman ng government natin for this topic is the legislative department. So, they are usually the one na gumagawa at nagbabago or nagre-revise rather ng mga batas through the power vested in the Philippine Congress. So, legislative department, or can be also known as Congress of the Philippines, consists of two chambers, namely the Senate and the House of Representatives. So, the Senate consists of 24 senators in which are elected through direct popular votes din, katulad ng President and Vice President natin. On the other hand, the lawmakers in the House of Representatives are often called congressman or congresswoman. And as of today, may total of 243 representatives tayo sa House of Representatives na na-elect from each districts and also through party list system that makes up of almost 20% din halos ng mga representatives. So, as you can see sa slide, may four bullets dito. So, these four bullets presented in the slide stated all of the functions and purposes of the legislative branch of government, which can be explained in a very simple form. So, if the executive branch is the one who implements and enforces the laws, and legislative branch naman, dito nanggagaling yung source or mga authors ng laws na ini-implement nila. So every senators or representatives can introduce bills and resolution without any limit, but it is not guaranteed that they can be approved as they still have to undergo a certain process called the lawmaking process. So to further explain this said process, let us now proceed to the next slide. So, in the lawmaking process, the president can either approve or veto a law passed by Congress. So, if you are not aware of what veto is, siya yung constitutional right na nagre-reject ng proposal made by the lawmaking body. So, basically, veto is the complete opposite of approving a proposal. So, ayun. Let's put this one in a context para mas madali niyo maintindihan. So let's say na a legislative body or a sanggunian consists of 270 officials and may isang bill na pinopose ng isang member nila and 90 officials veto that specific proposal. So despite that numerous disapproval, mas malaki pa rin yung chance na maipasa nga siya since umabot siya sa 2/3 mark na needed for it to be approved. In contrary naman, if hindi siya nakaabot sa 2/3 mark, it's either i-revise nung nag-propose yung bill na gusto niyang ipasa and they will introduce it again in front of the officials or worse, completely mababasura na yung bill na pinopropose nila. So I think that would be all for the government structure topic. Now let's move na sa next topic for this module, which is the next slide, please. The election process. So the election process in the Philippines has been revised countless times ever since nung time nga na nag-umpisang i-practice yung election sa Pilipinas. Kasi nga, continuously nag-a-adapt tayo sa changes na meron every year. Like for example na nga lang sa technology. Pero before we proceed sa election process, of course we have to know sino-sino nga ba yung eligible voters na kanina ko pa binabanggit sa previous discussion and paano sila nagiging eligible and in what way or paano rin nasa-scrape off yung eligibility nila as a voter. So sabi dito, to be a qualified voter in the Philippines, it is stated na A person shall be 18 years of age or over and a resident of the Philippines for 1 year and in the city or municipality wherein he proposes to vote for at least 6 months immediately preceding the elections are qualified to vote. So ayun, sabi nga as long as resident ka ng Pilipinas for 1 year and 18 years old ka na or above on the day of the elections, qualified ka nang maging voter for the national elections. So may iba kasing tao na may misconception na kapag nagparehistro ka, needed na 18 years old ka na agad. But actually, no. Last elections, may mga kilala ko nagpa-register even if 17 pa lang sila that time. Pero tinanggap sila as long as 18 years old na sila sa pinaka-day ng elections. So may isa pang minention na condition sa slide regarding sa qualifications in term of city or municipal votings naman. So para dito, applicable pa rin of course yung age pero specified na dapat resident muna sila sa certain city or municipal na yon ng 6 months before voting period. So, if ever na you are a past resident of Imo City and you move sa Tansa exactly 2 months before the day of the voting, yung presinto na assign sa iyo is still sa Imo City pa rin and the candidates na iboboto mo is yung mga candidates na tumatakbo for Imo City pa rin. Also, nakalagay din sa slide na only citizens who are not disqualified by law may vote. So the terms kung paano nga ba nasa script of ng law itself yung karapatan ng isang mamamayan para bumoto is stated naman sa next slide natin. So next slide po. So, flash in the screens are the conditions for disqualifications from registering as per Republic Act number 8189 or also known as the Voters Registration Act of 1996, Section 11. So, it is stated sa pinakaunang condition na a person is subject for disqualification if they have been sentenced by final judgment to suffer imprisonment for not less than 1 year. Pero may chance pa rin naman silang ma-reacquire yung right nila bilang botante after 5 years ng pagkakalaya nila. On the second condition naman, almost same lang din siya sa case ng nauna. Yung pinagkaiba lang nila is dito, it involves disloyalty sa duly constituted government. So yung common example ng ganitong crime is rebellion, sedition, or any crime against national security. And in order naman para ma-regain ng isang tao yung right niya to vote, in case ito nga yung dahilan ng disqualification niya, kailangan niya ding maghintay ng 5 years upon completion of their service of sentence. So last naman, sabi sa letter C na automatically disqualified din ang mga insane or incompetent person but needed na yung mga claim na they are really incompetent or insane is supported by a competent authority. So in this case naman, pwede nilang ma-reacquire uli yung rights nila to vote if a proper authority declared na they are no longer insane or incompetent. So one of the proper authorities na pwedeng mag-declare na they are incompetent or not is a doctor that is specialized dito, like psychiatrists and such. So in addition pala sa tatlo na discuss ko na conditions for disqualifications, all Filipino citizens na nagre-reside overseas are not disqualified by law to vote. Pero yung mga positions na pwede lang nilang pagbotohan are on the national level lang. So this aforementioned condition is under the Overseas Absentee Voting Law or the Republic Act 9189. So now that we're through the topics discussing the qualifications and disqualifications of voter, let's now move to topic about the process that usually happens when voting. So next slide. So the very first step that we usually do in election is registration. So to define the term that we will use para sa specific phase na to, we'll utilize Republic Act 8189 Section 3A. So, ayun, according to the aforementioned reference, registration refers to the act of accomplishing and filing a sworn application for registration by a qualified voter before the election officer of the city or municipality wherein he resides and including the same in the book of registered voters upon approval by the election registration board. So, to register as a voter, may mga papers siyang kailangan i-accomplish and ipasa like application form of registration and 3 copies with complete data na you can check in detail sa Section 10 of Voters Registration Act of 1996. So another one is that overseas absentee voting law applies the mechanics of Republic Act 8189 of personal registration either with the Board of Election Inspectors or with the representatives of the Commission and the Philippines Embassy and other foreign service establishment in their temporary residence overseas. So compared nga sa mga citizens residing here in the Philippines, medyo komplikado yung process ng registration ng mga Filipino citizens na nasa ibang bansa since they need to pass their accomplished form sa BEI personally. Unlike sa mga residents here na pwede nilang padaanan sa city or municipal hall and sila na yung bahalang mag-process nun. Pero either ways naman, same lang halos lahat yung mga kailangan i-accomplish ng dalawang Filipino citizens. May minimal differences lang kasi may ibang papers na need ipakita yung mga Filipino citizens na nasa ibang bansa nagre-reside and that is the Affidavit of Intent to Resume Residence in the Philippines. So upon accomplishing this phase, we naturally have to move now on the next step and that is, next slide please, the election day. So the casting of votes is usually conducted by the Board of Election Inspectors or BEI. So as mentioned nga sa first phase, pagkatapos maipasa yung mga needed na requirements para sa registration, kinocompile yung mga registration records na yon sa isang file called Book of Voters. And then sa Book of Voters sila magbe-base and coming up with a list of voters na nagko-contain ng enumeration ng mga pangalan ng registered voters in a specific precinct na duly certified by the Election Registration Board. So kung sino lang yung mga nakasulat na pangalan sa list of voters sa precinct na yon, then sila lang din yung allowed na bumoto doon, meaning sila lang yung registered voters para sa lugar na yon. So, usually exactly 3 p.m. yung official closing of votings, but since there are instances na nagloloko yung mga machine na ginagamit, hindi talaga may iwasang mag-pass sa scheduled time, but nonetheless, it is said na din na on 3 p.m., voting should be closed as after the closing, mag-start na immediately yung watchers sa counting. So after counting, hindi itatali agad ng mga official watchers yung count nila, but rather they would pass it sa BEI for verification to avoid tampering ng votes, then BEI na yung bahalang magtali officially ng election returns. So after all the ballots have been read and recorded, nilalagyan na ng BEI and principal watchers ng 6 major political parties ng pirma and thumbmarks ng election return para in case na may aberya dun sa specific election return na yon, madali nga siyang matatrace and malalaman agad kung sino yung dapat maging accountable sa mistake na yon. So, after malagyan ng signature and thumbmarks yung return, ibinibigay na siya agad sa COMELEC para naman sa canvassing of votes. So actually, yung counting, yung canvassing, and even up to consolidating of votes in the past are actually done manually. But since we're now in the progressive and modernized world, of course, naturally, maapektuhan niya rin yung usual way of voting process and dito napapasok yung modernized election process in the Philippine election. So next slide. So, the act of authorizing the COMELEC to use an automated election system in the 11th day of May, year 1998 in both national and local election is called the Election Automation Law or the Republic Act number 8436. So, unang nasubukan yung paggamit ng technology or electronic devices sa pagbibilang ng votes ng tumakbo si former President Joseph Estrada bilang pagkapangulo. So, sa Section 7 naman ng law na to, diniscuss yung regarding sa features ng automated election system. And those are presented on the screen. So, as you can see nga, makikita nyo sa features na nakapaloob sa sistema na to na they are trying to utilize yung paggamit ng makabagong teknolohiya sa pagboto and sa counting and canvassing of votes. So yung ganitong sistema is actually goal na ng COMELEC as early as 1992 pa lang. So they even call this goal as Operation MODEX. So ibig sabihin ng MODEX is Modernization and Excellence. So through inspecting the voting system of other countries, specifically ng United States, na-attain ng COMELEC yung goal na to on 1997 and right away, gusto na agad nilang i-apply yung system na to sa upcoming 1998 national and local elections. But then siguro, nagkaroon ng technical issues kaya hindi nila na-implement ng ayos yung automated election system para sa 1998 elections and also sa other preceding election year. And still, nag-resort pa rin sila nung time na yon sa manual voting system. So, on the 2004 national elections naman, na-implement na siya kahit papano but still, hindi fully nationwide yung implementation niya. So for the discussion ng implementation of RA 8436, let's now move on the next slide. So ayan nga, kahit na this project was planned as early as 1992 and nagkaroon na rin na several pilot testing on 1995 and 1996 para nga ma-implement as early as the 1998 national elections yung system, but still it was not successfully executed. So it was also said na nagplan na yung COMELEC to implement the system on the next national elections. So they even adopted on October 29, 2002 yung Resolution 02-0170 para sa 2004 national elections. So yung aforementioned resolution stated 3 phases ng automation election system and ayan yung nakikita nyo sa screen. So, yung 3 phases na yan, yung mga diniscuss ko kanina, so I hope tandaan nyo pa rin siya. So, even so, kahit pa may nakalatag ng resolution, it was said sa previous slide nga na hindi siya fully na-implement noong 2004 elections but rather sa piling lugar lang. So, full automated national elections was only conducted noong 2010 national elections. So, that was the exact year nung tumakbo si former President Benigno Aquino III for presidency. So I think that would be all for my discussion. I will now give the floor to Ms. Gretchen Cruz for the discussion of the next topic.
Thank you, Miss Angel. But before I start, I would like to apologize po if I'm not able to open my camera. Hindi po kasi stable yung internet connection namin. Thank you po. Now, I will discuss the next topic, which is voter behavior and elections. To start, we have here the 2003 update study on voter behaviors, and this study suggests the top 4 factors on what determines the vote of a Filipino electorate. So the first factor is the candidate's public servant image. An image or reputation means the general impression of people to a certain individual. So if a candidate has a good public servant image, like he is known for being reliable and such, he is more likely to win the public's vote. That is why those who have intention to run in the election avoid scandals as much as they can, especially those that have to do with serving the public. Second, political machinery. A political machine refers to a party, organization that recruits its member by the use of tangible incentives, such as money or political jobs. Thus, political machines control enough votes to continue to hold political and administrative power for certain people. Kaya kung mapapansin nyo, ang more likely na nananalo sa mga election is mayayaman, it is because they have enough resources like money para magkaroon ng solid na political machinery. Third is popularity. Karamihan sa mga Filipino electorate ay ang binoboto is yung mga kilala nila, kagaya ng mga celebrities turned politician o kaya yung mga galing sa political families. This is probably because they don't have time to research and get to know other candidates or kaya ayaw lang nila. That is why celebrities have a huge advantage going into any election. Unlike regular candidates, they don't have to spend money or effort building name identification because again, voters think they already know them. Lastly, endorsement of traditional networks and organizations, which include the family, the church, and formal groups. Mapapansin naman natin na tuwing election, paramihan talaga ng endorsement or endorsers. This is because voter tends to shortcut their voting decision. Some of them would just rely on certain groups or people that they trust or have the same perspective as them. Example is a church. Meron di ba ng mga church na parang nagkakaisa sila ng boto? Wherein kung sino napili ng church nila na endorse, yun ang iboboto talaga nila. And pwedeng example naman sa family ay madalas naman na yung tatakbo is connected, di ba, sa mga kilala o kaya ay part ng political families. Siyempre, yung mga supporters and followers nun will definitely vote ang kung sino man ang i-endorse nila. Let's proceed to the next slide po. The conduct of election is made complex by the practices and values, which in turn are reflective of the behavior and attitudes of the electorate and the politicians, and of the actual practices before, during, and after elections. Which is totoo naman, kasi diba tuwing election, we just need to choose or vote kung sino yung pinaka-deserving. Like maganda yung background, may credibility, and such. Pero dahil we have different values and behavior, nagiging komplikado siya kasi some would just stick to their values and talaga may paninindigan. Yung iba naman is gagawin ng lahat, even the most inhumane things para lang makuha ang gusto nila or kung saan sila mas magbe-benefit. Like pagsuporta sa mga corrupt or trapo na makakapag-cause naman ng suffering sa mas nakararami. Next po. Patronage politics. Patronage politics thrive in a culture where the government leader becomes a politician who accepts special favors in exchange for votes in upcoming elections or support for a political agenda, such as doling out money, recommending jobs and contracts for certain people. So yun nga, syempre yung mga tatakbo gagawin yan lahat 'di ba para sa suporta at boto. And may mga tao naman na again handang ipalit yung values and integrity nila para sa pera at kung anumang magbe-benefit sila personally. So sa culture na to, ang pinaka-common element niya is utang na loob. It is the powers that be used this to ensure that their political and economic interests will be served. This element is one of our cultural trait talaga as Filipino. 'Di ba? Pag may ginawang pabor sa atin yung isang tao, we feel obligated na in some way ibalik yung favor na 'yon. For example, during elections, 'di ba may mga political parties and yung madalas na nagli-lead nun ay yung powerful politician na tatakbo sa pinakamataas na pwesto. So yung leader na 'yon may invite other candidates to run under his party. Kaya yung candidate na in-invite, syempre feeling niya utang na loob na yon and to somehow repay that person, syempre mape-pressure siyang isupport yung political agenda or kung ano mang ganap ng benefactor niya, kahit na against siya sa idea na yon. Kaya kung titignan, para na rin siyang puppet ng benefactor niya. Gaya ng nasa picture, ay pa-next po pala. Kagaya ng nasa picture, kasi nga wala siyang choice and parang nako-control na din talaga siya. So next slide po ulit. Sa mga mahirap naman, giving their support to a candidate is seen as an investment so that they can depend on that politician for help. Parang backer nila ganon. Pag kailangan nila ng connections or kaya need nila ng donation, medicine or school fees. Kasi nga, sinuportahan nila yung taong yon. And they think na personal favor yon na dapat tanawin as utang na loob ng elected official. So next naman, di ba sabi nila, mararamdaman mo ng malapit na ang eleksyon kapag nakikita mo na yung mga kasansaan yung mga politiko. Siyempre, pabanguhan ng pangalan at pabidahan talaga. Ito kasi yung parang preparation ng mga tatakbo para maging familiar sa kanila yung tao. And yung mga tatakbo naman ng mataas na pwesto, syempre mas malawak na yung parang scope niya. Kaya need ng media for exposure kasi nga need nilang parang makipag-communicate sa mas malaking audience para makilala. And speaking of makilala, let's proceed to the next slide. So lahat naman tayo aware sa mga naging ganap ng election, lalo na ng labasan na ng results. And lahat naman ata talaga, di ba, is nagulat at nadismaya. Ito ay dahil imbis na competent at may magagawa talagang nanalo, ang nanalo at nahalal ay yung mga kilala or popular na celebrities na ang ilan pa ay wala talagang background when it comes to public service. Which is disappointing talaga kasi we could have so much better. And isa pang common factor ng ilan sa mga nanalo ay yung may mga pera or mayayaman. Kasi they were able to utilize their money for resources like machinery and other things na makakapag-enhance ng popularity nila. Which is disadvantage nga doon sa mga deserving pero hindi naman popular at well-off. Next po. During elections ay nagkakaroon ng mga debate and interviews para mapag-usapan ng mga issues na sobrang nakakaapekto sa mga mamamayan. Ginaganap din ito upang mahihag ang mga plataforma ng mga kandidato at mas makilatis ng mga boboto. Pero as the years pass by, parang hindi na ito nagiging relevant. Dahil nga parang enough na popular at well-off ka para manalo. Kitang-kita naman 'di ba sa resulta ng election nitong May kung sino pa yung hindi nagsisipot sa mga importanteng interviews and debate, siya pa yung nakakuha ng pinakamataas na posisyon sa bansa. Now, the 3 Gs of Philippine politics are guns, goons, and gold. It is a catchphrase coined by the media that represents the violence and vote buying na nagaganap during or even before elections. The existence of goons in some parts of the country is used to intimidate voters and harass their political opponents. This election-related violence seems to have become normalized every election day, especially in parts of Mindanao. Having access to gold or wealth naman keeps these chapo and political families in power, resulting in the prevalence of vote buying during elections, and yung mga mahihirap at mga low-income families ang mostly na subject nito. In the next slide, we will mention other fraud and violence that are employed in order to win the election. Next po. So, the following are the unethical practices na nangyari during elections na mismo. First is flying voters. A flying voter is a person who commits voter fraud, such as by having anomalously registered to vote. Madalas sa mga flying voters ay registered sa isang address na hindi naman talaga residence. Or kaya may mga cases naman na kung saan yung mga flying voter ay lumilipat ng residence pero hindi naman nakakapag-file ng application for cancellation or transfer. Next is registration of disqualified voters. Some political parties and candidates go to great lengths to ensure their supporters are included on the voter registration list. And para mas ma-ensure na maraming boboto sa kanila, they would even register yung mga hindi pa eligible as voter na kagaya ng mga underage at mga hindi naman talaga citizen. Next, ballot and ballot box switching. Paddling of votes through dagdag bawas na na-mention naman na kanina, and lastly, tampering canvas of votes. So these are only some of the actual fraud na nangyari during elections dahil marami pa talagang iba. And these instances nga is sobrang disadvantage sa mga candidate na walang enough na financial means nor political machinery to guard the integrity of the votes and election results. Nakagaya nga ng sinabi ko kanina. But we can still do something to prevent those mentioned unethical practices from happening. And that is to be vigilant and aware sa mga nangyari sa paligid natin. Dahil hindi naman lamang ilang tao ang maaapektuhan at magsasuffer kapag hindi natin naprotektahan ang mga boto natin, kundi ang buong bansa. Next po. Now, we should proceed to the next topic, which is guiding vision and action points for citizen voters. But first, we should discuss the vision of a good government, leaders, and citizen voter. So, the government should advance democratization and good governance. It is because a democratically governed nation is more likely to secure peace, promote economic development, protects its citizens, etc., that the whole nation will benefit from. Good governance, on the other hand, can ensure justice for the community. Everyone can be given the same opportunity to maintain and improve their welfare. Also, the government should make a meaningful and accessible election process para mas maging madali para sa mga tao na ma-exercise nila yung right nila, which is makapili ng leader na makakatulong sa kanila at sa bansa. Third is, dapat ma-maximize ng gobyerno yung mga benefits ng democratic mechanisms para sa ikabubuti ng bansa, lalo na yung mga nasa laylayan or marginalized sectors na walang means or kaya napagkaitan ng opportunities. Since karapatan yun ng mamamayan na responsibility naman nga ng gobyerno. Fourth is that they should ensure that the agenda and programs na ini-implement or isinasagawa nila is nagre-reflect din sa agenda at needs ng mga mamamayan. Dahil ang mga mamamayan naman talaga dapat ang nagbe-benefit sa mga programa ng gobyerno, lalo na sa atin din naman nila kinukuha yung budget to make those programs possible. Lastly, a good government should advocate new politics and new kinds of leaders na mas open-minded and binabalyo din ang participation or engagement ng mga citizen voters in running the affairs of the government. Mahalaga din kasi talaga ang participation ng mga tao, lalo na at sila mismo ang directly na naapektuhan ng mga desisyon at kung ano pa ng gobyerno. Guiding vision naman ng leader, a leader should capitalize and prioritize giving a better public service and program of action, rather than the popularity or glory of winning the election. It is because they are not elected to the office and paid using the citizens' money to just be there and do nothing. They are in that position para mag-serve and unahin ang welfare ng mga mamamayan. Second is to promote the envisioned government na binanggit ko kanina and to engage citizens' stake in governance. As a citizen voter naman, dapat na ina-exercise mo ang right mo to choose and to safeguard the integrity of your vote from fraud. Dahil again, dito nakadepende ang magiging future mo at ng ibang tao. Next is in choosing a leader, dapat ay ginagamit mo ang konsensya mo. And that includes not being swayed by any material things that can prevent you from choosing the right leader. As a citizen, we should be the first one that would protect our state and future. Electing underserving leaders means wasting our own chance to have so much better. Lastly, safeguarding and defending the democratic mechanism in institutions. And I think these three will also be mentioned in action points for citizen voters during elections. Let's now proceed to action points for citizen voters. So these are the following action points for citizen voters in pre, during, and post-elections. During pre-election, the citizen voter should engage in preparatory activities that would enable him or her to exercise the right of suffrage and the right to an informed and free choice. The first action point is to register during the period allotted for voter registration. Second, be informed of the issues, platforms, and personalities of the political candidates. The citizen can use various resources to gain information, such as the internet and news. Knowing the candidates can help the voter choose who deserve to assume the office or the position. Then, set specific guidelines in choosing government leaders in terms of the candidate's social affiliation, and interest, competence, lifestyle, and performance records. Di ba ang mga Filipino sobrang tataas ng standards when it comes to pageantry? Dapat when in choosing a leader, dapat ganun din. We should set a higher standard or guidelines, and ang mga na-mention kong factors ay sobrang importante. Dahil most likely, it will reflect on what will be their performance once they are already in that position. Siyempre, kung basta ka na lang pumili at ang pinili or binoto mo pa ay yung hindi competent, tamad, at may sketchy na history at social affiliation, imagine what will happen na lang sa bansa natin, di ba? So next po. Lastly, conduct or participate in public debates to educate voters and persuade candidates to prioritize integrating the interests and welfare of the people in their government program. This process can be used to remind and hold the elected leaders and accountable to the promises made during the campaign once na hindi nila gawin. Next po. During elections naman, the citizens should exercise vigilance and the right to vote and vote according to conscience. And that includes nga choosing the right leader. Then practice vigilance by protecting the integrity of your own vote from any undue influence dahil nga during these times kaliwat ka na ng mga dayaan. Then, the citizen voters can volunteer or join organization that work for clean and peaceful elections. Pwede din silang maging poll watcher na kung saan sila yung nagbabantay during the election process para makita yung mga nangyayaring paglabag sa batas. Then when a citizen voter witnesses or observes an instance of cheating, he or she should report it and inform the rest of the electorate. Next po. Pagtapos naman bumoto, it doesn't mean na tapos na talaga and basta na lang nating hahayaan yung boto. As a citizen, dapat na patuloy pa rin ang pagbabantay, lalo na sa counting at pagka-canvas ng boto. Kasi may malaki pa din ang possibility na magkaroon ng sketchy na aberya at dayaan. Another arena of participation is open to the citizen voter. Once the candidates they have voted for assumed office. Kasi di naman din natatapos sa election Parang yun lang palang yung umpisa at ang pinakamahalaga na at yung pinaka-reality is once na nasa posisyon na sila, yung mga kandidatong nanalo. Then, citizens should participate in local governance through development planning at the barangay level, consultations and public hearings, and representation in local special bodies. It is important din kasi na nadababoys out natin yung mga concern and ideas natin by participating nga in these mentioned activities para na rin maprotektahan at ma-represent din yung mga affected talaga ng mga issues, lalo na yung mga nasa laylayan. Dahil hindi din naman lahat ng tao is privileged enough and may capability to do those things. Next is legislative advocacy is another way that citizen voters can directly exercise their legislative power through the initiative and referendum systems. Legislative advocacy is a process of interacting with the legislature and other governmental and social institutions to ensure that the concerns and welfare of the general electorate are articulated in the deliberations of bills and other legislative measures, as well as in the final versions of laws. Next mo. Lastly, the citizen voter can also engage in the political and electoral process in other ways, kagaya ng pagtakbo mismo, pagsuporta sa mga political party, candidate or party list na align sa values mo. Then pwede ding mag-volunteer or give support sa mga initiative ng civil society organization na to ensure na honest at peaceful ang magiging election. Kagaya ng pagiging poll watcher nga na na-mention ko kanina. And last but not the least is yung pag-voice out ng opinion and ideas na na-mention ko din kanina. So that's all for this module. I'm now giving the floor to the next presenter to discuss the next module.